Most people don't feel like they're going broke. That's the uncomfortable part. They feel normal. They wake up, go to work, get paid, pay their bills, maybe feel a little anxious when the credit card statement comes in, but nothing feels like a crisis. From the outside, everything looks fine. There's a steady job, a decent apartment, a car that starts every morning, and a life that looks roughly like everyone else. And that's exactly why this problem is so dangerous. Because in 2026, going broke doesn't look like losing everything overnight. It looks like slowly losing control while believing you're doing okay. If you asked most people in the United States or Europe whether they're bad with money, they'd say no. They're responsible, they're careful, they don't gamble, they don't take wild risks, they're just living a normal life, and that normal life is quietly draining them. Let's start with a scene that will feel familiar to a lot of people. Imagine a 29-year-old professional living in a mid-sized city. Maybe it's Austin, Manchester, Berlin, or Lyon. They earn what most would consider a solid income. In the US, maybe that's $72,000 a year. In Europe, maybe 48,000 euros. On paper, this person has made it. They're not struggling like they did as a student. They're no longer counting every dollar at the grocery store. Friends and family might even say they're doing well. But once the paycheck actually hits the bank account, reality looks very different. After taxes, that $72,000 salary might become around $4,200 a month. In Europe, after taxes and social contributions, that 48,000 euros might turn into roughly 2,700 euros to 3,000 euros per month depending on the country. That's the real number, not the headline salary, not the one used in conversations. The number that actually matters is what lands in the account. And from that point forward, every decision is already constrained, even if it doesn't feel that way yet. Now comes housing. Rent or mortgage is usually the biggest line item, and it has quietly redefined what normal means. This person isn't living extravagantly, they're not in a luxury penthouse, they have a one-bedroom apartment or a modest starter home. In many US cities, that rent might be $1,700. In parts of Europe, maybe 1,100 euros. That's already around 40% of take-home pay. Not because they're reckless, but because that's what the market demands. This is important to understand. Many people aren't overspending because they want more. They're overspending because the baseline cost of normal life has moved up. Next comes transportation. In the US, that often means a car payment, not a flashy one, just a reliable modern car that doesn't break down. Maybe $420 a month. Add insurance at $140, fuel at $160, maintenance averaged out. Suddenly transportation is costing over $700 a month. In Europe, it might be a smaller car, public transport passes, fuel prices, parking fees. Different structure, similar outcome. Another large chunk of income is gone, not on something optional, but on mobility, the ability to show up to work and function in society. Then there are the invisible payments. Student loans, credit cards, buy now pay later plans, subscription services, none of them individually feel dangerous. A student loan payment of $280, a credit card minimum of $120, a phone plan at $90, streaming services at $60, a gym membership at $55, cloud storage, software, food delivery apps. None of this feels like financial irresponsibility. It feels like modern life, and that's exactly the trap, because when you add it all together, the margin disappears. At the end of the month, this person might have $300 left, sometimes less, sometimes nothing. Some months go backward, but emotionally it doesn't feel like failure. Everyone around them is doing the same thing. Their coworkers talk about car upgrades, friends talk about vacations. Social media reinforces the idea that this is just adulthood. So instead of questioning the system, people internalize the stress. They think, maybe I just need to earn a little more. That belief is incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous. Because here's the part most people miss. The problem isn't that these individuals are bad with money, it's that the financial system they're operating in has quietly normalized fragility. A life where one missed paycheck causes panic, where saving feels optional instead of automatic, where debt feels like a permanent background noise instead of an emergency. People aren't failing the system. The system is extracting just enough to keep them dependent, anxious, and compliant without ever triggering a full breakdown. This is where psychology matters more than spreadsheets. Humans don't evaluate money in absolute terms, we evaluate it relative to our peers and our expectations. If everyone around you is spending the same way, your brain labels it as safe. If your lifestyle matches your income group, it feels earned. And if you're not visibly struggling, it feels sustainable. But sustainability isn't about whether you can survive this month. It's about whether your financial structure improves your future or quietly erodes it. What's happening in 2026 is that normal has become mathematically incompatible with progress, not comfort progress. People can survive, they can function, they can appear stable, but they're not moving forward. Net worth doesn't grow, optionality doesn't increase, risk tolerance shrinks. Every year they become more dependent on the next paycheck. That's not poverty. That's a soft form of financial stagnation that looks respectable enough to ignore. And the most unsettling part is that this situation often affects people who are disciplined, educated, and hardworking. They followed the rules, they studied, they got the job, they upgraded their life in small, reasonable steps. Nothing felt excessive, nothing felt reckless. And yet when they stop and look at the numbers honestly, they realize something uncomfortable: they're running in place. Or worse, slowly falling behind inflation, debt, and rising expectations. This is not a story about bad choices. It's a story about default choices, the ones you make when you don't actively question what normal costs, and that's where this conversation really begins. Because before we talk about solutions, behaviors, or alternatives, we need to understand the core mistake that keeps ordinary people financially stuck, not because they lack discipline, but because they were never shown how fragile normal actually is. Once you step back from the surface level details of rent, car payments, and subscriptions, a deeper pattern starts to emerge. The real issue isn't any single expense, it's the structure underneath all of them. Normal finances are built around the idea that income today should comfortably support consumption today. That sounds reasonable, it feels intuitive. But mathematically and psychologically, it creates a fragile system where people are permanently exposed to risk, even when everything appears stable. Let's take that same working professional and zoom out slightly. On paper, they earn enough to cover their needs, but look at how their money behaves over time. Every month, almost the entire paycheck is pre-committed before it arrives. Rent is fixed, the car payment is fixed, loans are fixed, subscriptions renew automatically, insurance renews automatically. The system assumes continuous income, it assumes health, it assumes employment stability, it assumes nothing goes wrong. And that assumption is doing far more damage than most people realize. In the US and Europe, modern financial life has quietly shifted from flexibility to rigidity. 50 years ago, a larger portion of income was discretionary. Today, a large portion is locked in. Once you sign a lease, take a loan, or finance a lifestyle, your future income is already spoken for. That doesn't feel dangerous in good times. In fact, it feels efficient, predictable, organized. But rigidity is the opposite of resilience. And resilience is what determines whether someone builds wealth or merely maintains appearances. Here's a simple piece of math that rarely gets discussed honestly. If you take home $4,200 a month and your fixed expenses total $3,800, you technically have a surplus. But functionally, you don't have freedom. You have exposure. Any unexpected cost, a medical bill, a job change, a rent increase, a family obligation pushes you immediately into debt. Not because you live extravagantly, but because your margin is too thin to absorb reality. And reality, unlike budgets, doesn't ask for permission. This is where many people make a critical mental error. They think the solution is optimization, a cheaper phone plan, cutting a streaming service, cooking at home more often, and while those things can help at the edges, they don't address the core problem. The core problem is that the financial system most people operate in is designed to keep them fully utilized, not financially independent. Every dollar has a job, and that job is usually consumption or repayment. There's also a subtle psychological trap here. When someone is fully utilized financially, they feel responsible. They're paying their bills, they're meeting obligations. There's a quiet pride in that, it feels adult. But responsibility without slack is not strength, it's vulnerability disguised as maturity. True financial strength includes the ability to absorb shocks without emotional or behavioral collapse. Most normal financial lives cannot do that. Now let's talk about income growth, because this is where many people place their hope. They assume that if they earn more, the pressure will ease. And sometimes, briefly, it does. A raise comes in, maybe an extra $400 a month after tax. For a few months, there's breathing room, savings increase slightly, stress decreases slightly, but then something else happens, often unconsciously. The baseline adjusts, a nicer apartment becomes reasonable, a newer car feels justified. Better vacations feel earned. None of these decisions feel reckless, they feel proportional, but proportional spending keeps people in the same relative position indefinitely. This phenomenon isn't about greed, it's about identity. Humans anchor their sense of progress to visible improvements in lifestyle, not balance sheets, not net worth, not optionality. A better apartment is tangible. A higher savings rate is abstract. A new car is socially legible. Financial resilience is invisible. So even intelligent, cautious people default toward choices that signal progress, even when those choices delay actual financial advancement. In 2026, this dynamic is amplified by social comparison. Even if you don't consciously compare yourself to others, the environment does it for you. Social media, workplace norms, housing markets, they all signal what is appropriate for your income level. And once something is labeled appropriate, resisting it feels like deprivation, even if you were perfectly fine before. This is how lifestyle inflation becomes normalized without ever feeling indulgent. There's also a system-level issue that rarely gets acknowledged. Many financial products are designed to lower the psychological pain of spending by spreading it out. Monthly payments, EMIs, financing, buy now, pay later. These tools don't make things cheaper, they make them feel smaller. and when costs feel smaller, people commit to more of them. Over time, this creates a dense web of obligations that is extremely difficult to unwind without discomfort. What makes this especially tricky is that none of these decisions are irrational in isolation. A car loan might be necessary. A student loan might have been unavoidable. Renting might be the only realistic option. The danger isn't any one choice, it's the cumulative effect of stacking long-term commitments faster than income stability and savings capacity can support. That stacking happens quietly, gradually, and with social approval. If you ignore this pattern long enough, the long-term impact becomes severe, even if nothing dramatic ever happens. Savings stagnate, investments remain small or inconsistent, career flexibility decreases because income must remain constant. Risk tolerance shrinks, people stay in jobs they dislike not because they lack ambition but because they lack margin. Over time, financial life becomes reactive instead of intentional. This is the harsh truth most people avoid. Being normal with money today often means sacrificing future flexibility for present comfort, not luxury, comfort, and comfort is expensive when it's financed indefinitely. The cost isn't just financial, it's psychological, chronic low-level stress, constant background anxiety, the feeling that you're always one decision away from instability. And yet, from the outside, everything still looks fine. That's what makes this so hard to confront. There's no obvious crisis, no dramatic failure, just a slow narrowing of options, a life that becomes harder to change the longer you live it. That's not because people are careless, it's because they were never taught to question whether normal was actually sustainable. This paragraph isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because once you see the structure clearly, you start to realize that the goal isn't to live cheaper or earn more at any cost. The real goal is to rebuild margin, financial and psychological, in a world that quietly trains people to eliminate it. To understand why this pattern persists, even among people who consider themselves financially aware, we need to look at the psychological forces underneath it. Not the obvious ones like impulse spending or lack of discipline, but the quieter beliefs that shape how people think money is supposed to work. Because most normal financial behavior isn't driven by ignorance, it's driven by assumptions that go unchallenged for years. One of the most powerful assumptions is that stability comes from predictability. A steady paycheck, fixed expenses, a routine. This idea is deeply embedded in modern professional life, especially in the US and Europe. You're taught that once you secure a stable job and set up your life around it, you've reduced risk. In reality, you've just concentrated it. When most of your expenses depend on one income stream, predictability feels safe, but it also means any disruption hits harder. There's also the belief that debt is neutral as long as it's manageable. This is one of the most dangerous ideas in personal finance, not because debt is inherently evil, but because manageable is rarely defined. For most people, manageable simply means I can make the payment. That's a very low bar. It says nothing about opportunity cost, nothing about long-term flexibility, nothing about whether the debt improves your future or just finances your present. Consider how often people frame financial decisions around monthly affordability instead of total cost. A $35,000 car doesn't feel like $35,000. It feels like $450 a month. A 20,000 euros renovation doesn't feel like 20,000 euros. It feels like 220 euros a month over several years. This framing bypasses rational evaluation and speaks directly to emotional comfort. If the monthly number fits inside the paycheck, the brain labels it as safe, even when it quietly absorbs years of future income. This is where simple math becomes uncomfortable. That $450 monthly car payment over 6 years isn't just $450 times 72 months. It's also 6 years of reduced savings, reduced investment, reduced flexibility. If that same $450 were invested monthly at a modest return, the difference over a decade isn't small. It's life-shaping. But because the cost is spread out and the benefit is invisible, most people never feel that trade-off in real time. Another psychological factor is what could be called earned permission. When people work hard, they feel justified in upgrading their lifestyle, and to be clear, that feeling isn't wrong. The problem is that permission often replaces analysis. Instead of asking, does this improve my long-term position, the question becomes, do I deserve this? And once a decision is framed as a reward, opposing it feels like self-denial rather than prudence. This is especially relevant for young professionals and early career earners. After years of studying, interning, and struggling, the first real paycheck carries emotional weight. It represents relief, validation, progress, and so spending becomes a way of closing a difficult chapter. Again, this isn't foolishness, it's human. But when those emotional decisions harden into permanent financial commitments, the relief becomes a burden. There's also the social component. Humans are deeply sensitive to status even when they claim not to be. Status doesn't always mean luxury. Often it means not falling behind. living in a decent area, driving a reliable car, taking normal vacations. The fear isn't standing out as wealthy, it's standing out as constrained, so people stretch quietly just enough to stay aligned with their peer group. In 2026, this pressure is amplified by visibility. You don't just see your neighbors anymore, you see curated lives from across the world. And while most people intellectually understand that social media isn't real life, emotionally, the comparison still lands. The result is a subtle inflation of what feels acceptable. Expenses that would have felt excessive 10 years ago now feel baseline. Another belief that keeps people stuck is the idea that financial progress is linear. That if you just keep doing what you're doing, working, paying bills, upgrading gradually, things will naturally improve. But financial progress is not linear for most people, it's lumpy. It requires periods of restraint, imbalance, and intentional asymmetry, and that runs directly against the desire for smoothness and comfort. What financially intelligent people understand, often through experience rather than theory, is that smooth financial lives tend to produce flat outcomes. When income and expenses rise together, net worth stays stagnant. When every raise is matched by a lifestyle upgrade, the future never meaningfully improves. This isn't obvious when you're inside it. It only becomes clear when you step back and look at years instead of months. There's also a deeper emotional layer: avoidance. Many people sense, at least vaguely, that their financial structure is fragile, but confronting it would require difficult trade-offs. It would mean questioning choices that feel tied to identity. So instead, the mind minimizes the risk. Things will work out. I'll earn more later. This is temporary. These thoughts reduce anxiety in the short term, but they delay corrective action. Over time, this avoidance compounds. The longer a lifestyle is maintained, the harder it is to change. Fixed costs become non-negotiable, obligations become normalized, and the idea of stepping back feels like regression, even if it would improve long-term outcomes. This is how people end up financially stuck, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack psychological space to think differently. If nothing changes, the long-term impact is subtle but severe. Retirement becomes distant and uncertain. Career choices become constrained. Financial decisions are made defensively instead of strategically. People become risk-averse in areas where risk could actually improve their lives and risk-tolerant in areas where it quietly harms them. The harsh truth is that most people don't fail financially because of one big mistake. They fail because of a series of emotionally reasonable decisions that add up to structural weakness. And until that structure is questioned, not judged, not attacked, just examined, nothing meaningfully changes. This is where the shift begins. Not with tactics or tricks, but with a different way of thinking about what money is actually for. Not to signal progress, not to maintain appearances, but to increase resilience, optionality, and long-term control. And once that mental shift happens, behavior changes naturally, not out of guilt or fear, but out of clarity. Once that mental shift begins, the contrast between normal financial behavior and financially intelligent behavior becomes very clear. Not dramatic, not flashy, but fundamentally different. The difference isn't about extreme frugality or unusual income, it's about how decisions are evaluated and what outcomes are prioritized over time. Financially intelligent people don't ask, "Can I afford this?" in the short-term sense. They ask, often unconsciously, "What does this commit my future self to?" That single question changes everything. A car isn't evaluated only by its monthly payment, but by how many years of flexibility it removes. An apartment isn't judged by whether it's nice, but by whether it preserves margin. A raise isn't seen as spending power, but as an opportunity to change trajectory. This way of thinking can look conservative from the outside, sometimes even boring, but internally it's deliberate. Financially intelligent people are deeply aware of fixed costs because fixed costs determine freedom. The higher your fixed costs, the fewer choices you have when circumstances change. This isn't a moral judgment, it's a mechanical reality. Consider two people earning the same income. One structures their life so that 70% of their take-home pay is fixed, the other keeps it closer to 45%. On the surface, the first person might appear to be doing better: nicer place, newer car, more visible consumption. But the second person has something far more valuable: slack. They can absorb a setback without panic. They can invest consistently. They can say no to things that don't align with their goals. Over time, that difference compounds quietly but relentlessly. Another key difference is how financially intelligent people treat debt. They don't think in terms of good debt versus bad debt as slogans. They think in terms of leverage versus drag. Does this obligation increase future earning power or reduce it? Does it create options or close them? A student loan that meaningfully increases income potential might be acceptable. A car loan that simply maintains a certain image often is. The distinction isn't ideological, it's functional. Importantly, financially intelligent people are not immune to desire or social pressure. They feel the same pull toward comfort and status as everyone else. The difference is that they delay gratification long enough to evaluate trade-offs honestly. They're willing to look slightly behind in the short term to avoid being permanently constrained in the long term. That willingness is rare, not because it's difficult intellectually, but because it's uncomfortable socially. There's also a different relationship with income growth. Instead of letting lifestyle rise automatically with earnings, financially intelligent people treat raises and bonuses as leverage points. They ask, what problem can this solve? Maybe it accelerates debt reduction. Maybe it increases savings to a level where anxiety decreases. Maybe it creates room for future risks. The point is that income growth changes the structure, not just the surface. This is where many people misunderstand financial intelligence. They assume it means deprivation. It doesn't, it means intentional imbalance. Periods where income grows faster than lifestyle by design. Periods where comfort is intentionally capped so that future flexibility expands. These periods are temporary, but their effects are permanent. Another quiet behavior difference is how time is valued. Financially intelligent people are acutely aware that money is stored time. Every recurring payment is a claim on future hours of labor. This makes them cautious about commitments that don't meaningfully improve their lives, not because they're cheap but because they understand the trade. Paying for convenience is acceptable. Paying indefinitely for status often is. Over years, this mindset produces a very different emotional relationship with money. Instead of constant background stress, there's a sense of control. Not certainty, no one has that, but control. Decisions are made from a position of strength rather than necessity, and that changes everything from career choices to personal relationships. Crucially, financially intelligent people don't define success by how closely they match their peers. They define it by how much optionality they have. Can they take time off? Can they change jobs? Can they handle an unexpected expense without debt? These metrics are invisible to outsiders, which is why they're often undervalued. But they're the metrics that actually determine quality of life over decades. This doesn't mean financially intelligent people never enjoy their money. They do, but enjoyment is deliberate rather than automatic. They choose where to spend disproportionately because they've chosen where not to. That trade-off is what allows both enjoyment and progress to coexist. From the outside, this way of living can look like restraint. From the inside, it feels like alignment. There's less internal conflict, less justification, less financial noise. Money becomes a tool rather than a source of anxiety or identity. And this is the key reframe. The goal isn't to escape the system entirely. It's to stop being passively shaped by it, to design a financial life that absorbs reality instead of breaking under it, to build a structure where normal doesn't mean fragile. By the time people reach their late 30s or early 40s, the gap between these two approaches becomes impossible to ignore. One group feels increasingly boxed in despite earning more. The other feels increasingly flexible even without extraordinary income. The difference isn't luck, it's structure reinforced by mindset. And once you see that, the question stops being, how do I make more money? And becomes, what kind of financial life am I building and who does it actually serve? By the time people fully notice what's happening, years have usually passed. Not in a dramatic way. There's no single moment where everything falls apart. Instead, there's a quiet realization that life feels heavier than it should, that decisions feel narrower, that despite earning more than they once did, they don't feel meaningfully safer or freer. This isn't a personal failure. It's the natural outcome of a financial model that prioritizes short-term normalcy over long-term resilience. The uncomfortable truth is that most people don't consciously choose to be financially fragile. They drift into it by following patterns that are socially reinforced and rarely questioned. They accept rising fixed costs as a sign of progress. They accept long-term payments as the price of adulthood. They accept low margin as inevitable. None of these choices feel wrong in isolation. Together, they quietly shape a life where money dictates options instead of supporting them. In 2026, this dynamic is especially unforgiving. Costs rise faster than stability. Jobs feel less permanent. Economic shocks are no longer rare events, they're recurring features. In that environment, a financial life with no buffer isn't just stressful, it's risky. And yet the dominant narrative still suggests that if you're struggling, the solution is to try harder, earn more, or optimize around the edges. That narrative misses the point. What actually matters is not how hard you work, but how much of your effort translates into future leverage. Not how impressive your lifestyle looks, but how little it requires to maintain. Not how busy your financial life is, but how quiet it becomes when things go wrong. These are not ideas that sell products or go viral. They're ideas that reveal whether a financial structure is built to last. There's also something deeply human that gets lost in the normal approach to money. When every dollar is pre-committed, the mind never fully rests. Even if stress is low, it's constant. There's always something due, something renewing, something waiting. Over time, that low-level pressure shapes behavior. People become more cautious, less creative, more risk-averse, not because they lack ambition, but because their financial structure punishes deviation.